In this example, we're using a simple array as our data store. But in real life, you'll surely be querying a database. So let's set up a database connection in this episode. Open up your sidebar and visit the .env file. This is where you'll store all important configuration settings, keys, and values. Now we'll reach for this file many times in the series, but to start, point your attention here. The first thing to understand is all of these keys, DB port, DB database, all of those will be referenced within the corresponding configuration file. And if you open up the sidebar, you'll see it right here. So let's go to database. And if I scroll to the top, you'll see that we reach for those keys all over the place. So in this case, which database connection are we using? Are we connecting using a MySQL adapter or SQLite or Postgres or something else? So in this case, it's going to read that key from the environment file. And if it does not exist, we will default to MySQL. All right, let's switch back. And sure enough, we have defined it to be MySQL. Great. Let's keep going. Here's all the various connections you can choose from. So let's imagine you want to use SQLite instead. Okay, you would switch back to your environment file and change the connection, like so. Now you're using SQLite. Okay, let's bring it back. And you'll see right here, once again, for things like the database we're connecting to, or the username, or the password, once again, we read from the environment file. Okay, so let's fill it out. I am going to use MySQL. The host is localhost. The port is fine. The database, we need to create one. Why don't we call it something simple, like Laravel 6? Next, the username and password. You should know that, but if you installed it through Brew, very likely the username is root and the password is blank. So let's go ahead and create that database. And I'll start by doing it manually, and then we'll switch over to a GUI. I will sign in with the username of root, and then we will create a database called Laravel 6. There we go. So now we've specified that we'll use MySQL to connect to this database using these credentials. So now that you know how to manually create the database, let's switch over to a GUI. Now, you surely have one that you like, but you might consider Table Plus, that has an app for Mac and Windows, or SQL Pro for the Mac, or Queryous. All of them are great, but I will be using Table Plus. So let's create a new connection, MySQL. We'll just call it localhost. The host and port are the defaults. And again, the username is root and the password is blank. Finally, the database I'm connecting to is Laravel 6. Okay, let's test it. Looks good, so I will save it, and then we'll connect. And we're all set to go. So let's finish up by manually creating a table, and then we'll use Laravel to write a query against it. This table is called posts. We need an ID column. The data type is serial, and that's fine for a primary key. If you're not familiar, that stands for it should be a big integer, it should auto-increment, it cannot be null, and it should be unsigned, meaning a positive number. And that's almost always what you will want for a primary key. Next, I'll add another column here for the slug. Think of this as the URI you'll use to access the post. Let's do, let's see, that should be fine. Finally, one more for the body of the post. We'll keep it very simple. So now in Table Plus, I need to hit Command S to commit those changes. So if I view the data here, we're all set to go. Let's add one sample row. So again, Command S will commit the change, and we're ready to switch back. Let's return to our controller through the app HTTP controllers directory. And by the way, I'm doing this manually mostly for your benefit. In real life, and for most episodes of this series, I will access it using some equivalent of Command P. That way I can quickly browse to the file. So now, no longer do we hardcode the posts. Instead, we will fetch it from the database. So remember, in this case, we're grabbing one post that has the corresponding slug. Let's update that to be slug to be a little more clear. Now, I can say, and just come along for the ride, and we'll explain it more in a minute. Using this DB class, I want to select from the post table where the slug column is equal to what we fetched from the URI, and give me the first result. So now, often you'll want to inspect a variable. You can use this helper function called dd, dump and die. It gives you a quick way to inspect a variable and then kill the execution. Here, I'm getting null, but only because our slug is 123, and there is no record with a slug of 123. So let's update that. And sure enough, we did fetch that record. So now all we have to do is pass it to the view. But now we have one more issue. Here, we're still checking into that array. Well, I'll show you a better way to do that in a moment. So I will delete it entirely, and we end up with this. But it's still not quite going to work. If I switch back to Firefox, it fails. Let's take a look at that file. So again, I could go to the resources views directory, or I could access it directly using Command P. And most modern editors these days will have some form of that, so just research it. Okay, so now you'll see we're trying to echo out post. But at this point, post is not a string, post is an object. And to confirm that one more time, let's die and dump or dump and die the post. And if I run it, it's an object. So what we really want is the body property of that object. Okay, let's switch back and we'll say, give me the post body. And that should do it. So we give it a rerun and there we go. Now our posts are stored in the database, which is a bit more practical for most use cases.